Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by co-host Matt Carter. And today we are going to address some elephants in the room after NC State's disappointing 24-10 loss. More bad news was to follow on Monday, but also we will get to maybe some positive news in the sense that we're going to preview NC State's next opponent, Furman, which is the only FCS opponent on the schedule, the highest likelihood of any game left on the schedule or any game on the entire schedule that NC State will win. So I think you'll like what we have to say about what is to come this Saturday. But before we get into it, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always watch us on our YouTube channel, where you should subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Notifies you when a new video is up. That way, you're staying informed on everything Wolfpack. So go subscribe to the Wolfpacker YouTube channel. Give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment. Tell us what you think. We had some Mississippi State fans in the comments after the last podcast episode. So NC State fans, I'm calling on you to get it right and get the right shade of red back in our comment section. But
what happened, though? I didn't even read that. What did they say?
They went back to our apparently some Mississippi State fans listened to our preview podcast, and they criticized. Well, I'm talking about one person specifically, but they said that we were underestimating Mississippi State's run defense, which he's got a point. Got a point. Not gonna lie, we dropped the ball there. They're pretty damn good. No, I mean I think I said somewhere in the podcast that Mississippi State would have a good defense, but it wouldn't be one of the tougher defenses left on NC State's schedule. I'd like to walk that back because I think that Mississippi State actually, behind Clemson, you could make the argument the defense that they put on the field Saturday night was as good as any that NC State's going to see the rest of the season, just based on the first 2 weeks of ACC football. Because, man, this conference has some work to do.
They do. And to that Mississippi State fan who apparently has a lot of time in his life.
Thank you for listening, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate every listener we get. We appreciate every subscriber we get. I know we got a new subscriber last week. We dropped the ball on that. I knew that after the podcast too. I think I said it.
You called me after. You said I've been looking at the run stat numbers for Louisiana Tech, and one of their runs was a 45-yarder. The rest were like 2-3 yards a pop. So,
yeah.
In fairness, you knew before the game.
The quarterback had run for like half the yards on one play. So it got me thinking, and then the Pro Football Focus grades, and I was like, I corrected it. I would point out if that listener wants to go read our Scouting Mississippi State report, he'll see that I did a course correction on that particular stat. But kudos to him or her, whoever it was, for listening to the podcast. So, but on the bigger news this week, I think, Justin.
Yeah, about that. I didn't want to get to that, but Payton Wilson, best defender on NC State. You could make the case best defender in the ACC, an All-American type talent. Unfortunately, he's going to miss the rest of this season, and it's probably the last time we're going to see Payton Wilson in an NC State uniform. So just prepare yourself for that, Wolfpack fans. He's probably going to go pro based on the fact that he could have gotten drafted, and then he suffers a season-ending injury like this in the second game of the year. So just prepare yourselves for that. And also, not to minimize the second injury here, because we're talking about another starter at cornerback, Cyrus Fagan. He's out for the season. The FSU transfer just came in. So 2 starters already out for the season for this NC State defense that has looked very, very impressive in the first 2 weeks. But I will say, like I said on the last podcast, reflecting on that Mississippi State game, that NC State defense just did not look the same without Payton Wilson on the field. They might have been a little shaken up just based on seeing him get hurt I know that had an emotional impact on the sideline, and that was kind of clear on TV, frankly. I mean, in the heat of the game, I think I maybe mistook it for just maybe underestimating or just kind of quitting on the game. But no, I think that really had a big impact on them because Payton Wilson is a captain, a leader on this team, and he's very well liked in that locker room. So, Matt, just your instant reaction to that news on Monday that dropped like an atomic bomb.
Well, it's big when it makes national news, right? When you have your Pat Forties and your Pete Thamels and those type of guys, Bruce Feldman tweeted about those type of guys tweeting about it. You're talking about a national talent, I would say, a guy that the national guys have on their radar. And frankly, for NC State, that doesn't happen a whole lot. I mean, there's maybe a guy or two a year, and it's a good year for NC State. So you don't lose the ACC's leading tackler from last season and not suffer a drop-off. The question is how minimal will the drop-off be, and can perhaps there be some elevation in other places on the defense to offset that drop-off? I went back and looked at the Mississippi State game, and look, they did not score. Payton, kind of misleading because Payton Wilson didn't play a lot against South Florida either, and he only played about a quarter and a half at Mississippi State, but the defense never gave up a single point with Payton Wilson on the field this year. But I will say, that first drive, when he got hurt, Mississippi State went down and scored a touchdown. There was a 3rd and 10 conversion. There was a 3rd and 9 conversion, I believe, and then the infamous 4th and 7 conversion. It's not like the defense wasn't in position to get off the field and prevent that touchdown. And then, the other touchdown drive they gave was when Bam Knight fumbled near midfield, had a short field. I don't think the defense did that bad without Payton Wilson. It's going to be a drop-off, but I do.
I didn't say bad, but they weren't dominant. I mean, they held Mississippi State to 5 effing yards in the first quarter.
Yeah, no question. And if you add up the second and third quarter, Mississippi State would have been on pace for 500 yards in a game. And then the fourth quarter, the defense stepped up and gave NC State some chances to try to get back into the game. There will be a drop-off. I when I look at it, and I still look at the schedule, I went 8-4 before the season started. Even after the Payton Wilson injury and even after the Cyrus Fagan injury, where you're a little bit better off. Jakeem Harris started every game at safety last year, played more snaps than anybody at safety last year, actually started the opener. Jakeem Harris got the nod in the second game. So instead of having effectively a platoon out there, you just go back to Jakeem Harris being the main guy. That's not a terrible situation at all. That you feel okay with that. You just need to keep Jakeem Harris healthy now.
And he stayed healthy last year. He played more snaps than anybody on the team.
Yeah. So I think I still think they're an 8-4 team. I don't think this injury changes the dynamics for me in my prediction. Looking at these other teams, the teams that could score a lot, they could score a lot whether or not Payton Wilson's on the field. And the teams that are going to struggle to score, I think the defense is still good enough, deep enough to hold those teams in check. We'll see how Jalen Scott does. He'll get the first shot at replacing Payton Wilson. He lost a lot of weight in the offseason, really transformed his body. Jalen Scott, when he was in high school, was a guy that everybody thought was destined to be a big-time recruit. He had the Clemsons of the world knocking on his door early in his career. That the recruiting process unfolded. Some of those schools kind of shifted focus elsewhere, but it's not like Jalen Scott was a no-name kid coming to school. He was a well-known commodity for 2-3 years. NC State had known him well. He had a lot of experience. So I guess I would say big picture, I think, yes, it'll hurt. I'm not sure it changes the dynamics as dramatically as some people might think it does.
I agree with you on most of what you said. I also agree with the point that it doesn't change my in-season record prediction, but I will admit that it does decrease what I think of NC State. I think this does hurt a defensive unit that, frankly, for the first 5 quarters of the season, looked like it had the capability to be the second or third best defense in the ACC. It's not as good as Clemson's. It just doesn't have that type of talent, but it could be right up there with like a Pittsburgh. Behind Clemson, this unit had the opportunity to be second best in the ACC, and that is good enough to potentially go out and compete for a 10-win season. Now I think it's not saying that it couldn't be that, but that's also more of a devaluing of the ACC based on what I've seen in the first 2 weeks. NC State's tough schedule that we all thought was going to be just this long journey where you'd be lucky to go 8-4 even with a good team. Now it doesn't look so tough because Louisville looks incompetent. Florida State just lost to Jacksonville State. Syracuse lost 17-7 to Rutgers, a team that had 140 passing yards in that game. I mean, these are all games that NC State should win at this point, whereas maybe before the season we're looking at them more like toss-ups. And we'll see. We'll see what NC State looks like when they respond. We'll see what the rest of these teams end up evolving into. Unfortunately, we're not going to learn anything this weekend. I don't think we're going to learn a damn thing. Sorry to burst any type of teasers that you're trying to do for the upcoming week of content, Matt. I apologize. But we are not going to learn anything until the Clemson Tigers come to Carter Finley Stadium on September 25th. Unless this NC State team makes it a close game with Furman, which I do not expect. I expect NC State to win by at least 4 possessions against an FCS opponent. I don't care if they're a top 25 FCS opponent. You're talking about significantly less talent than what is going to be on the field in red and white. But, again, I think NC State can still go 8-4. Hell, they could go 9-3. I mean, they could really surprise people down the stretch. Without Payton Wilson, though, it loses some optimism for me in the sense that I thought Clemson might have been gettable this year. If NC State was fully healthy and the way Clemson was kind of starting off the season slowly on offense, I thought, well, this NC State defense could really give the Clemson offense some problems. I'm not saying that they still couldn't, but without Payton Wilson on the field, like you said, Matt, some guys can elevate and get better, but what Payton Wilson does is he forces offensive coordinators to account for him on every single play, which means that they're not scheming as hard against the other guys, which allows them to produce more than maybe they would without a Payton Wilson on the field. Not saying that Jalen Scott could be a great linebacker in the ACC, but he's not Payton Wilson. Not yet.
Well, I'll go back to what I said, and I agree with a lot of what you said. I think what we've seen, when we looked at this, we all thought Syracuse was probably a likely win, right? Nothing had changed that dynamic. If anything, I've been kind of surprised Syracuse was as competent as they looked in the first 2 games. I thought they were in for a real long year. But I thought the wild cards on the schedule were Louisville and Florida State. Florida State on the road, Louisville at home. They don't look as much as wild cards anymore. They don't look like teams you need Payton Wilson on the field to beat. Kind of go back to what happened last year. When Devin Leary went down, I'm not picking on Justin Williams here. There were a lot of fans talking about that. Ben Finley, should we go with Ben Finley? Should we just go ahead and get Ben Finley ready? And the point that some were making, I'll include myself in that particular group, was that Bailey Hockman could win a lot of those games still left on the schedule. Because it wasn't you had to get through UNC and Miami, but after that, it was smooth sailing, and Bailey Hockman could beat those teams. We focused on Payton Wilson's injury. Boston College just lost its starting quarterback for the rest of certainly for the NC State game.
Forgot about them. That should be a win now, too.
Yeah. You put that game now, you need Payton Wilson just a little bit less in that game. up at Boston College. And that was one of those vaunted 50-50 games, with Mississippi State was, with Wake Forest on the road is, with UNC at home is. Those games still look 50-50. And we don't know a whole lot about Wake Forest. We'll find out about them soon enough. Those 50-50 games still remain, and a lot of them on the road. Miami, I would include now as a 50-50 game. They haven't looked like world beaters this season. So that's kind of where I kind of come from. I kind of reflect back to the Devin Leary injury last year, where Bailey Hackman can beat a lot of those teams left on the schedule. Jalen Scott and Vi Jones, whatever combination they use, is probably good enough to keep that NC State defense good enough to beat a lot of their teams on the schedule. Really, it's going to come down to the development of the offense. And obviously, they got to play better. And, that was one of my, if you read the Scouting Furman piece of getting the mojo back on offense is one of the things to watch for NC State. But if they go out and score 52 points, who cares? You're right. It doesn't mean much. The only thing that would matter is if they go out and score 30-some points against Furman and don't look pretty doing it, and it's a slug, and it's like going in mud, right? You're just spinning your tires and not going anywhere. If it's an effort like that, then you have cause for concern. That's the only thing you will learn from Furman. So your hope is that you learn absolutely nothing from Furman, right? Because if you're going to learn anything, it's going to be negative, it's going to be bad. So to me, that's one of the keys about Furman. I mean, we'll talk about Furman briefly, but it's about getting the offensive mojo back, getting Devin Leary knocking on a couple of deep to kind of get that timing with guys like Anthony Smith, maybe getting Porter Rooks a little bit more involved in the offense. I know that's a popular one with the fans on our Wolf Den message board right now. Why isn't Porter Rooks playing more? Maybe get the running backs back. The PFF grade, if you look at a premium beyond the box score piece that I put up, that was the lowest grade ever in Pro Football Focus history of grading NC State football game for performance in the run game ever. So obviously they need to get back on track. So
how far does that go back?
2014, and then the full season to 2014. There are a few sporadic games that were included in 2012 and 2013. So they scored a 46.0 with the grade. They had never been below 50 before. So not only is it the lowest grade, it was the lowest grade by a few points ever. In the run game, they differentiate between run blocking and running. So that's the running of the running backs and the quarterback that grade comes from. So, that vaunted Bam Knight, Ricky Person duo need to run like a vaunted running back duo is supposed to run. Apparently, when you look at the film, they did not run well against Mississippi State. So that's what kind of important for NC State. That's what's got to start Saturday. Go out and have the big success you're supposed to have, feel good about yourself, and then get ready for the toughest defensive.
Got to see some more explosive plays. But Matt, I think you hit on so many great points there.
Can I pat myself on the back?
I mean, I was about to give you a ding, ding, ding. I mean, it was like light bulbs were just going off in my head when you were talking about how this injury, it puts more pressure on the offense than it does the defense, because when Payton Wilson was in the lineup and how that NC State defense was playing for the first 5 quarters of the season, I was almost starting to get the sense that, this is an NC State team that is going to rely on its defense. It's going to lean on the run game and the offense, ease Devin Leary back in, get him settled. Because, he wasn't like an A-plus quarterback in those first 2 games. I thought he was average to above average. He looked like he was shaking off some rust. But we haven't yet to see Devin Leary return to any, type of peak performance like we did in that, road game at Pittsburgh prior to his injury. Of course, he did have 2 games last season before he was hurt that he never really looked like that again either. But, we'll see. I think he can get back to that point. He clearly has the talent. He has the arm strength. I think he has, the football IQ to be that successful. So, but it might take some time for him to get back to that point. And now all of a sudden, there's more pressure on him. There's more pressure on those running backs. There's more pressure on Tim Beck that this NC State offense has to get back to the explosiveness that it displayed in 2020. Because really, I mean, we saw it against USF, but, do we really learn anything from that? And if we
South Florida gave up 670 yards of total offense to Florida in week 2, which goes back to the point, I love making my belief. It takes, 3 to 4 weeks to figure out a season?
Well, actually, that's not true, Matt, because there is one thing I'm sure of.
What?
Alabama is going to win the national championship.
Still got to get through Georgia, right?
I mean, come on, dude. Really?
All right. Well, I'll tell you this, though. But my point being, everybody got excited about Mackenzie Milton, the quarterback of Florida State.
Yeah, Mackenzie Milton. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody got excited about what he did against Notre Dame and how they took Notre Dame to overtime. And then the next game out, they laid an egg. He stunk. Well, I don't know if he stunk, but Florida State stunk and lost on the last play of the game to Jacksonville State. Notre Dame had to battle to beat Toledo. Just goes to show you that you can't overreact to week 1, and et cetera, et cetera. So, we still have time to figure some stuff out. But, yeah, that big performance against South Florida, it doesn't look as big when you see what Florida did to South Florida, too. And so you have to just take all that into account as you kind of figure out, okay, how do we recalibrate our expectations here after seeing 3? And I think for NC State it'll be 4 weeks. I think they get a bye. No, they get Louisiana Tech after going into that Louisiana Tech game after Clemson. We should know a lot about where this offense, where NC State will be, and where the defense will be post Payton Wilson and Cyrus Fagan.
And let's be honest for a second. I know NC State scored 45 points in that season opener against USF, but we weren't talking about the offense really after that game. We were talking about the running backs, but there was nothing creative offensively about that game. They literally just ran it down their throats because they had better athletes. I mean, it wasn't.
And they ran it to the left.
Yeah. I mean,
they just ran it left every time and ran for 300 yards.
Yeah. So and not to mention that defense was consistently putting the NC State offense in just prime field position because, I mean, routinely NC State would get the ball at 50-yard line or better. So, we'll see. Look, I think all of this is just a dress rehearsal for Clemson. And, I don't think NC State should really be thinking about Clemson, but come on, they're human. You need to come out and you need to have a confident performance this week. If you just bring your mojo, you bring your confidence, and I think they will. It's going to be at Carter Finley Stadium. It's going to, the fans are going to be there. I hope it's going to be a strong attendance. Hopefully it's not going to be too hot in Raleigh, although it'll be a night game. So you got no excuses. Yeah. Just, go out to the game, have a good time, enjoy the nice weather. I wish I could go. But what do you know about Furman, Matt? Am I just completely underestimating them? Or, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I see FCS on the schedule, and I'm like, if you're a Power 5 team, you should beat FCS teams by 4 touchdowns, or you're not a good team.
Probably. I put in the key. Furman is good enough that you can't just sleepwalk through the game. And if you do sleepwalk through the game, they're good enough to start annoying you and start being annoying. Are they good enough to beat NC State if NC State shows up, plays with hard effort, good energy, all that? No, they, as you said, probably 4 or 5 touchdowns differential. I mean, there's not a single player on the Furman roster that NC State would have probably considered recruiting. And frankly, if their guys went in the transfer portal, the entire team, I'm not sure how many guys NC State would take a look at. So that's kind of the difference between FCS and FBS. I'm not a fan of these kind of games. Never have been. As far as FCS teams go, Furman is a competent FCS team. They are ranked in the top 25. They beat a top 25 team in their opener. They had their first shutout in 17 years in week 2. It is a program that has been to 3 FCS title games. They've been to the playoffs 2 of the last 4 years in the FCS. So they're not all due respect to Western Carolina, who really struggles at the FCS level. This is a much more competent, but they're not James Madison either. Remember when James Madison came to NC State back in, I think, 2018? That was going to be a competitive game. James Madison is a legit title contender that year in the FCS. And I think it ended up being like a 2-score. So that's how I would describe it. They got a quarterback that's off to a good start. They do have one of the best running backs in school history. They have an All-American tight end, a freshman receiver doing really well. They got a really good pass rusher at the FCS level. We had 15 sacks a couple years ago. They have a corner that intercepted 3 passes already this season and is an all-conference contender. So it's a nice team for the FCS level. It really is. That this is really about NC State focusing on themselves, showing up ready to play, showing up motivated and not sleepwalking, and really the key to games like this is putting the hammer down early. Yeah, it should be over by halftime. So that's the key. A lot of people right away in the first quarter. I don't prescribe to that. But by halftime, the game needs to be over.
And the good news for NC State fans is that I'm going to say something nice about Dave Dorn right now because I'm seeing a lot of negativity on Twitter. I want to mention that just briefly because I think it's really, really premature in the season for that, guys. I mean, come on. Like, let's at least get to the midpoint of the season before we start going after the head coach. It's a 1-1 team. You're in week 2. They just lost the best defensive player on the team. But Dave Dorn is great in these games. NC State doesn't lose these games under Dave Dorn. They win games they're supposed to win. That is not the problem right now, and you can't say that about former head coaches at NC State. You can't say that about NC State historically in football. They have had their examples of stink bombs in the past, losing games they had no business losing. So I got all the confidence in the world that NC State's going to take care of business on Saturday and that Dave Dorn's going to have this team ready to play. But, again, it's like, yes, there were coaching errors, but no, I don't think they were directly from Dave Dorn in the Mississippi State game. And, like, where is this I understand where the criticism is coming from. It's a frustrated fan base that's just coming off the College World Series disappointment and it's the fact that it's the SEC record and the lack of success against SEC opponents. But, like, Dave Dorn just got a contract extension to 2025. He just brought in a great recruiting class. You're getting to a model of consistency to where NC State is relevant and is towards the top end of the ACC more times than not. Like, don't you want to see that through? That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I'll wrap it with this too. I think sometimes fans think the head coach pulls the strings on absolutely everything, and may be surprised where the head coach doesn't pull the string as much as you think they do. This is really a coordinator's game, assistant coaches. It's impossible for the head coach to pull the strings as much as people think they do. And let's not forget, look, Dave Dorn said on his radio, so I think they called a zone blocking play, and the offensive guard immediately went in on the snap, ran an inside run play. And it completely blew the play up because nothing Mississippi State did. He ran the wrong play, or the kickoff return for a touchdown was supposed to be kicked to the right side of the end zone. He kicked it down the middle instead. And then a player got out of his lane and in the process impeded another NC State player who was in his lane and took 2 guys out. And next thing you know, as Coach K once said, it's not like it's a video game where you can control what the players are doing. But if you hit A, B, or X, Y, or whatever, the players automatically do what you want them to do. It's all about preparation, and it's about motivation. Respectfully, I look at it when you're out a team 114-5 in the first quarter. That's would indicate to me you came prepared to play. It just didn't show up on the scoreboard. And it would indicate to me you came motivated to play. It didn't show up on the scoreboard. And then that started to trickle down, and it became a problem. So we'll see. This week is all about motivation, though. Let's see how fired up they come out and how quickly they can take care of business.
I have faith. I have confidence. Wolfpack, let's see it through. Come on now. I want a blowout on Saturday. I'm gonna be listening to it on the radio because I can't watch RSN on the West Coast. So, and my reasoning there is I don't want to see it if it's something bad, and if it's something good, then I'll just listen to it and I can visualize it, and I'll go back and watch the condensed game on ACC Digital Network. But thank you everyone for listening. Tune in Saturday. We've got some more good content coming up on the Wolfpacker.com. Use promo code PACK60 while you're there at the Wolfpacker.com. And don't forget, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always watch us on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We can't thank you enough to our subscribers. And if you listen to this podcast, you better be a subscriber at the Wolfpacker on YouTube. Follow us on social media at the Wolfpacker on Twitter. At Justin H. Will is my Twitter handle, and you can give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on the Wolfpacker.com. So for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.